In the middle of May, in an office in New York, several dozen people sat down to a work lunch. There was lettuce on the table and cilantro, the kind of ordinary green garnish nobody looks at twice. One of the people eating was a lawyer named Chase Strangio. A week later, he woke in the night feeling wrong. The next day brought a low fever and diarrhea that would not stop. On the 5th day, he found out that other people from that lunch were sick too, which is the moment an upset stomach stops being your own bad luck and becomes something else. He lost 7 pounds. He needed 2 separate intravenous lines to put the water back in him, and the worst of it, he says, was not the symptom that made all the headlines. It was the cramping, which stayed long after everything else had gone. He did not learn what was inside him until the 4th of June, more than 2 weeks after he first got sick. By then, he had already started to recover. That gap between eating and knowing is not a detail of his story. It is the whole reason this outbreak grew to be the largest of its kind ever recorded in the United States, and it is the reason nobody could stop it while it was happening. The thing that made him sick is a parasite called Cyclospora, and it does not behave the way food poisoning is supposed to behave. Most food poisoning announces itself in hours. This one waits, and when it leaves a human body, it is not even dangerous yet. It has to sit somewhere warm and wet for days first, ripening, before it can make anyone else sick. That single fact does 2 things. It means the parasite arrives in a field through water or through human waste, days before anybody eats anything. And it means that when a person finally does get sick, the source is a week or 2 behind them and a very long way away. It gets worse. You cannot wash it off. The rinse that bagged salad gets, the chlorinated water that kills so much else, does not kill this. There is no step in the process between the field and the bowl that removes it. If it is on the leaf when the leaf is cut, it is on the leaf when it is eaten. So consider what an investigator is up against. A person gets sick in Michigan. The illness started 2 weeks earlier. The food that carried it was eaten days before that, and it is long gone into a landfill or a stomach or a compactor behind a restaurant. There is nothing left to test. What the investigator has is a memory of a meal and a receipt and a shipping manifest and several thousand other people trying to remember what was in their lunch. That is the investigation that ran through the summer of 2026. It began quietly, the way these do. A cluster appeared in the middle of June on the federal watch list of outbreaks under investigation. By the end of the month, there were 145 known cases in 17 states. 2 weeks later, the federal disease trackers sent a formal alert to doctors across the United States because the number had gone past 1,600 confirmed and 5,000 probable, and the doctors needed to know to look for a parasite that most of them had never once seen in a patient. Then the investigators did the only thing available to them. They asked people what they ate. And when they compared the answers, one item came back over and over. 9 out of every 10 sick people interviewed in a cluster of states had eaten shredded iceberg lettuce, and they had eaten it at the same chain of restaurants. The paper trail behind that lettuce ran backward through the distributors and converged on one supplier, and behind that supplier, one growing region in central Mexico. On the 17th of July, Taylor Farms recalled every iceberg lettuce it had sourced from central Mexico. It went out to 28 states. The next day, the restaurant chain's foot traffic dropped by nearly a third. It is worth stopping on who Taylor Farms is, because the size of the company is part of the mechanism. It was started in 1995 by a man named Bruce Taylor in the Salinas Valley in California, in a family that had been growing vegetables there for generations. 3 decades later, it employs something like 25,000 people, runs plants across 4 countries, and takes in around $6 billion a year. It makes roughly 4 out of every 10 bagged salad kits sold in the United States. Its customers are the names you would expect: the big grocery chains, the warehouse clubs, the fast food counters. If you have eaten a salad you did not wash yourself, there is a fair chance this company washed it for you. That concentration is not a scandal on its own. It is the thing that makes a bag of cut lettuce cost what it costs. But it changes the shape of a mistake. When one supplier handles that much of the supply, a single field in a single valley is not a local problem. The leaves from that field go into the same shredder as everything else, and out the other side into trucks bound for 28 states and several restaurant chains together. A contamination that would once have sickened a county now sickens a country, and it does that before anybody has a name for what is happening. 2 days after the recall, the Food Safety Agency announced that its one positive test, the single laboratory result showing the parasite in a bag of that lettuce, was wrong. A false positive. In the agency's own language, it did not represent true amplification. It was withdrawn. So the count stood like this: thousands of people sick across dozens of states, a recall covering 28 of them, a company's name in every major headline, and not one sample of food, not one, that had ever tested positive for the thing that made them sick. The agency did not change its conclusion. It could not, and it should not have, because the case was never built on the laboratory in the first place. It was built on the interviews and the shipping records, on the fact that sick people kept naming the same food, and that food kept coming from the same place. That is a real kind of evidence. Courts convict on less, but it is evidence about paper and memory rather than evidence about the food itself, and it leaves everyone unsatisfied in a specific and dangerous way. The company can say, truthfully, that nothing it sold ever tested positive. The agency can say, truthfully, that the lettuce did it. Both statements are correct at the same time, and a system where both of those can be true is a system that will have this argument again. It had already had it. In 2013, salad mixes from the same company, grown in a different Mexican state, sickened hundreds of people in a Cyclospora outbreak that ran through restaurant chains across the Midwest. And in 2015, the Food Safety Agency did something quietly remarkable. It put a standing seasonal block on fresh cilantro from the Mexican state of Puebla, and it explained why in writing. After outbreaks in 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015, inspectors had visited nearly a dozen growing and packing operations there, and the agency concluded that it was extremely unlikely these recurring outbreaks were caused by isolated contamination events, and that no single supplier, farm, or packing house could explain all of the illnesses. That is the most important sentence anybody wrote about this. The agency was not saying it had found a bad farm. It was saying the opposite. It was saying the problem was not in any one farm, it was in the region, in the water and the sanitation and the fields themselves, and that no inspection of any single operation was going to fix it. Somebody typed that conclusion into a public document 11 years before this outbreak began. And this outbreak was worse than anything before it. In an ordinary year, the United States records somewhere between 200 and 1,000 cases of this illness. By the end of July, there were more than 6,000 confirmed nationwide, and more than 18,000 when the probable cases were counted with them. Over 400 people were sick enough to be hospitalized. The youngest was 1 year old. The oldest was 98. Michigan took the worst of it. By the end of July, the state was counting more than 12,000 illnesses of its own, and nearly 200 people admitted to hospitals, in a state where a normal summer might bring a handful. Health departments there started sending notices to doctors explaining what to test for, because a physician who has practiced for 20 years in the Midwest may never once have ordered the specific test that finds this parasite. It does not show up on the standard panel. If nobody asks for it by name, the result comes back saying nothing is wrong. That matters because it means the case counts in this story are not the number of people who got sick. They are the number of people who got sick, went to a doctor, had that doctor think of a tropical parasite, got the right test ordered, and had it come back before they recovered on their own. Every step in that chain loses people. The 18,000 is the part that made it through, and by the end of July, federal investigators were running 6 separate Cyclospora investigations at once, because this was never only about one bag of lettuce. A congressional inquiry opened the same week. On the 3rd of August, the federal disease trackers reported the first deaths. 2 people in Michigan, both of whom had other conditions that this illness and the dehydration it causes made worse. They were not named. What is known about them is only what the notice says, which is that a parasite most people survive found 2 people whose bodies had no room left to absorb it. So here is the postmortem, and it is not really about a bag of lettuce. It is about the distance between when food is eaten and when anybody can know it was dangerous. Every part of this system is fast, except the part that detects harm. The lettuce is cut, bagged, shipped, and eaten inside of days. The parasite takes a week or 2 to make itself known. The test takes another week after that, if a doctor even thinks to order it. And the traceback takes weeks more. By the time the answer arrives, the food is gone, the field has been replanted, and the season has moved on. What that gap produces is not a company that lied, and not an agency that failed. It is something stranger and much harder to fix. It is an argument nobody can settle, running again and again, while the same crop goes back into the same ground. Somebody wrote that warning down in 2015 in a public document anybody could open, and 11 summers later, every word of it was still true. But the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.